And I'm glad to start with Daniela Petrisan, who is going to speak about compositionality of effects in semantics and automata theory.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this invitation. So it is very nice to be here. In my lab, we have, I was just telling Bryce that we have a building which is called Sophie-Gelman and an amphitheater which is called the Turing Amphitheater. So this is a bit like in a dual setting from what I am used to. This work is based with actually more collaborators that I put here. So you will see a bit of an overview of some work that I've done recently. With my former PhD student, Alexandre Gois, my former master student, Ralph Sarkis, who's now doing a PhD in Lyon, and also in collaboration with Anna Sokolova. And there will be also some functorial automata theory that was developed with Thomas Colcombe. So I will try to give credit as we go along. The overview is that first I will try to present some motivation and context for this work. Then I will speak a bit about monads and their relationship to effects in semantics. Then I will try to see in what sense we can transfer these results from semantics to automata theory. So how can we see various forms, various classes of automata as automata with side effects? And then I will describe weak distributive laws and how they play a role in composition of effects. And finally, how we can determinize automata via this concept of weak distributive laws. And if time remains, we will see also in what sense weak distributive laws are in fact strong laws. So to come back to motivation and context for this work, so a computational effect in general is defined as the interaction between a program and its environment, and we have various examples such as error raising, input and output, global local state, continuations, probabilistic choice, and in particular in this talk, the main example that we will be concerned with involves non-determinism and probabilistic choice. And we will see how can we compose these computational effects and how they can interact with other basic constructs in programming language. We'll see that this is actually a challenging problem in semantics that has posed problems for many years now. So the approach that is taken in this talk is that based on the now very classic work of Eugenio Moggi, so he's using monads and in particular Kleisli categories to model these effects. And then I will also see how we can look at various classes of automata as automata with effects. And present this category theoretic tool for composing monads, and hence this has an impact on how we can compose various effects in automata theory and in semantics in general. So how do we look at semantic models for non-determinism and probabilistic choice? This was the basic example. To model a non-deterministic choice, we will have an operation, a binary operation, which should be commutative, idempotent, and associative. And for probabilistic choice, we will use a family of binary operations, this plus with an index R, indexed by some rational number in 0, 1, 1. And the interpretation of this operator should be that some process P or some process P happens with probability R, while the process Q happens with probability 1 minus R. And these operations now should satisfy the axioms of convex algebra or barycentric algebra. So we don't have commutativity, but rather we have a skew commutativity, which makes sense considering the interpretation just giving. So P plus RQ is the same as Q plus 1 minus R P. Then Q happens with probability 1 minus R, and P happens with probability 1 minus R, which is R again. So we can ask this question from a universal algebraic question: how do we combine these two theories, one for non-determinism, the other for probabilistic choice? And in general, what has to happen is to have some form of distributivity between these. There is a very long history about how to combine these operations in a domain theoretic setting. So there's a lot of work by Jones and Plotkin and Achim-Jung and Regnatics. So the list here is by no means exhaustive. There were even more recent model about papers about mixed power domains based on various approaches. So there are the power cone models, the provision models, some index valuations, co-products of monads. So people came out with various ways of putting together these effects. More recently, in these two papers that I cite here of Filippo Bonchi and Anna Sokolova with Alexandra Silva, respectively, with Valeria Vignudelli, they also looked at how to combine probabilistic choice and non-determinism in a algebraic setting, having in mind as an application probabilistic automata. So what are probabilistic automata? There are these gadgets here described on the left, where you have some states, x0, x1, x2, and then you have the non-determinism behavior of the system, which is described with the continuous arrows. And then, I mean, here, with A, you can go with probability 1/2 to x1, or with probability 1/2 to x2. With the other A, you can go with probability 2/3 to x2 and with probability 1/3 to x0. So these are probabilistic automata where you have both the non-determinism and the probabilistic aspect. In the theory of probabilistic automata, people sometimes determinize these systems into what they call belief state transformers. So these are these gadgets, where here the states are no longer just the states from the original system, x0, x1, x2, but now you can consider probabilistic, so convex combinations of states. So here you have 1/2 x1 plus 1/2 x2, or 1/3 x0 plus 2/3 x2. And from the state x0, which you can see it now as 1 times x0, you can go to either this convex combination of states or to this convex combination of states by performing the action A, or you can also go to every convex combination of these two convex combinations. So the system that you obtain is actually infinite. You have to take a convex closure of the set of states of the original system. Okay, so this belief state transformers, you can see them as non-deterministic automata. So now you have only the non-deterministic behavior. Only that now the set of states has changed. You have convex combinations of the original sets. So this resembles somehow. I mean, you got rid of the probabilistic choice aspect, branching behavior of the system. You incorporated it in a set of states. So this resembles very much procedures like determinization of non-deterministic automata taken at another level. And the question that was asked in these two papers is, can we, they try to understand probabilistic bisimilarity and other aspects concerning the traces for trace equivalence for such systems from a categorical point of view using coalgebras. Only that for technical reasons that will become apparent in a bit, the theory was not that smooth to develop. So a lot of lemmas and proofs had to be redone somehow by hand. So we will get to that in a bit, why this was a little bit of a problem. But you can see as a motivation for our work, explaining this kind of determinization and this kind of transformation of a system exhibiting several behaviors into a system with less effects from a categorical perspective. So to get back to our main tool, to monads, in the previous slides, I was showing you the idempotent operation for non-determinism and the other family of binary operations for convex algebras. And all these concrete universal algebraic presentations can be incorporated from a category theoretic perspective using monads. So I expect in this audience everyone knows what a monad is. So if this is the case, I will just skip the definition, but if someone wants to see the definition, do let me know. But just to say that the intuition here is that we are flattening terms of terms, so you can see the set S of X as the terms with variables in some set X for a given algebraic theory, and the unit of the monad is simply taking a variable and looking at it as a term. So the monad that corresponds to the non-deterministic choice that I presented just before is the power set monad. Well, the finite power set monad if I'm only interested in the finitary operation. Otherwise, if I allow myself taking arbitrary subs, so if I want to have complete subsemilattices, then this is the full power set monad that should be considered. So you all know this monad. It acts on a set by taking the subsets. On a function is the direct image, and the unit is taking the singleton, with the multiplication being the flattening. And all this satisfy the usual axioms of a monad. Now for the barycentric algebras that I described earlier, we will use the finite distribution monad. So this has as Eilenberg-Moore algebras, the barycentric algebras. So on a set X, the functor D takes the finite probability distributions, so they have finite support. For a functor F, the F is defined again via direct image. The unit takes the Dirac distribution, and the multiplication is again a flattening of distributions on X. And yet again, we have the usual axioms. So these two monads, a power set and finite distributions, are the main actors in the examples that I will present for our theory. So now, in what sense do we have automata with effects? So I will jump a bit between effects in semantics and effects in automata. And this is where the work with Thomas Colcombe come into picture. It started with a very simple observation that various forms of automata can be interpreted by looking at a very simple free category spanned by a graph in various output categories. So here, the little a, which is there, you can think of it as some letter in a finite alphabet. And now, if you interpret this diagram in the category of set, where 1 is a singleton set and 2 is a two-element set, and Q is some set of states, then such a diagram describes a deterministic automaton, okay? Because the map from 1 to Q selects an initial state. The map from Q to 2 tells me which states are accepting, which states are rejecting, and then for A, you have the transition map. Now, if you want to look at non-deterministic automata, you can look at a very similar diagram, only that now you are interpreting it in the category of sets and relations, which is Kleisli for our friend power set. So here, the arrows now are relations, so you have a set of initial states, those which are in relation with the singleton on the left. You have a set set of accepting states, those which are in relation with the one on the right. And for every letter in the alphabet A, you have now a transition relation on the set of states rather than an automaton. So keep in mind that rel is Kleisli of power set, and set also is Kleisli category of a poor identity monad. If you want to look at weighted automata, you interpret the same diagram, but now in the category of vector spaces. So instead, so all the arrows now should be linear transformations. K is a one-dimensional vector field. So having a map from K to Q, which is a linear transformation, means selecting one initial vector, the one where the base of K is set. Every A gives you a linear transformation on the vector space Q, and then you have a final linear transformation that tells you what are the weights for each state. And vec K is the Kleisli category. I mean, it's also an Eilenberg category of, but in this very special case, it's also a Kleisli category. Of course, you can work with semi-modules, and then you will, then you will have to pick the Kleisli category to have an accurate description of what are weighted automata over some semi-ring S. Also, we have an explanation of sequential transducers. So here you have, so what are sequential transducers? They have the same shape as an automaton, only that whenever you fire a transition from with a letter from the input alphabet, you also have the side effect of outputting a word in a given output alphabet. So here, the monad T, I may write it here. So the input alphabet is this A, which is encoded in the input category in the diagram that you have on the right, whereas for the transducers, the output alphabet is encoded in the monad T, which is defined on a set X as B star, so the free monoid on B times X plus 1. So this is actually a monad, so you can think that its algebras are partial actions of the free monoid B star. So you can consider its free algebras, okay? And now if you interpret what is, so given an A in A, the map, this map in Q, actually, if it lives in Kleisli of T, this actually is a map from Q to B star times Q plus 1, which means that, given a state in Q and the input letter A, you either say that this transition is undefined, which is how subsequential transducers work, or you go to another state and you output a word in B star. So using this monad T, so this is the monad. The automata interpreted in this Kleisli category of T are exactly, they match precisely the definition of sequential transducers from the literature. With Thomas Colcombet, we wrote a paper where we moved, it was not just the modelization of the automata that fitted nice in all these cases, but also you can explain minimization of these various forms of automata in a unified framework. And furthermore, in another paper with master student Riccardo Stabile, we also established that we can generalize the learning, the L-star learning algorithm of Anglin. This, which is classical and well known for deterministic automaton, this works very much in the same way for weighted automata for subsequential transducers, and matches existing generalization of the L-star algorithm. So we have a generic algorithm that works for this functorial automata. Because of course, you can think of these forms of automata as functors from a very special category with 3 objects. where you have, I mean, the category is parameterized, of course, in the input alphabet. So you have this little graph that spans freely a category, okay? And then for every word, okay, you have a map from in to out. So whenever you have some word, A1, AN, you have a morphism from in to out, which is given by the composition of these arrows. And this is how you can say what is the language which is accepted by such automata. Because for a word, in the first case, for a word W, you will have a map from 1 to 2. And this tells you, is this word accepted or not? And you use the fact that the morphism from 1 to 2, I mean, you have just 2 of them. The same happens for the morphism from 1 to 1 in the category of relations. So this is this explanation of automata as automata in Kleisli category. I mean, all the categories that you have here are Kleisli. And of course, you can put there the finite distribution monads if you want. You can put there the maybe monad. So every monad that you wish to put, you can interpret the automata with the corresponding effect. And of course, one question that we are trying to address in some ongoing work that I will not touch upon today is to better understand for which Kleisli categories you get the sufficiently nice properties that are required in order to get minimization on learning algorithms. But this is another topic. What is interesting from this compositional perspective is that now you look at your automata as functors defined on this category and which go into some output categories, okay? But you can have relations between these categories, okay? So in particular, if you have some monad T defined on a category C, you have the usual adjunction between C and Kleisli of T. So you have the free functor from C to Kleisli of T, which is identity on objects, and you have its right adjoint, okay, which on objects acts like T. So now, if now you consider 2 languages which are morally the same, okay, so recall that a language for us is a map that to each word associates an element in a set of objects, a set of morphisms in the output category. So I'll come to an example in a bit. But for the moment, if you have these 2 languages, one which is interpreted in the category C and one which is interpreted in the category Kleisli of T, which should be suitably related, I mean, morally they should represent the same classical languages, say, then this adjunction, okay, can be lifted between categories of automata that accept the 2 languages. So one particular case of this construction that is very easy to grasp is when you instantiate T with the power set monad. So now for Kleisli of T, you have the category of relations. So here you have a normal adjunction between set and rel. And now, I mean, when you have a language, okay, I'll improvise. So a language, you can see it as a map. I mean, what is it a language? It's a map from A star to 2. But you can see that you can look at it either as a map from A star to set 1, 2 via this isomorphism, or you can look at it as a map from A star to rel 1, 1. So this for me will be L set. This view of the language will be L set. This view of the language will be L rel. So morally, I want the same language. So now, I mean, on the left-hand side, the automata for L set will be this automata that go from 1 to 2 in set, and they should be transformed in automata interpreted in rel, where the input and output objects are mapped to 1 and 1. Okay, and then the adjunction that you have at the lower level will actually lift to an adjunction between the categories of automata, and the free functor that you have here, which is identity of objects, what does this mean? This is looking at a deterministic automaton as a non-deterministic one. So it's just the inclusion of deterministic one into non-deterministic. The right adjoint, which is here, which is the lifting of UT, this is the determinization, okay? So then, this is exactly how determinization works. You take a set of the automaton Q and you map it to power set of Q. Okay, so you can see that determinization can be looked at as a right adjoint. And it's not only working for rel and set, it's working in general for any category C that you put there, and Kleisli of a monad on this category. So it's this picture that works in general. And moreover, it's even, it's not just for Kleisli adjunctions. It works in general for every adjunctions, provided that you pick your languages and your input and output objects in a suitable way. So there are some mild assumptions, but they are very mild. So what we were trying to do in now to connect the dots with what I was explaining in semantics before is, can you actually apply the framework of monads and Kleisli categories to explain this probabilistic automata and how they are transformed to belief state transformers? Can you explain them in this setting of automata with effects? So what I would actually like to say is that the picture that we have on the left, the probabilistic automata, are functorial automata interpreted in Kleisli of power set composed with D. That's what I would dream to say. And then the determinization, morally, should be the lifting of some right adjoint functor, which goes between Kleisli of power set D, to Kleisli of P. Okay? So because here on the right hand side, I have non-deterministic automata, which are interpreted in Kleisli of P. But I can dream a lot, because this is something that we can't actually say that nicely, okay? And the reason why this is not possible is that, in fact, if you look at power set composed with D, that's not a monad, okay? You cannot have a monad structure on that. And it brings us to the next section: how do we compose monads? And again, for this audience, so I recycled some slides, I must confess. But for this audience, I go very quickly. How do we compose monads? If I have two monads T and S, the standard way of obtaining a monad structure on ST is to attempt to define some multiplication. The problem is defining the multiplication of ST, and you would want a way of switching the S terms and the T terms, okay? And then to combine the T terms with the multiplication for T and the S terms with the multiplication for S. So the missing piece of the puzzle is this natural transformation from TS to ST. But in order for ST to have the full monad structure, it cannot be just an arbitrary natural transformation. It needs to satisfy four axioms, and these are the compatibility with the two units and the two multiplications of S respectively T. Okay, so this is why we have these four axioms, and each one is used in some part of the proof when you are trying to see that ST has this monad structure. There is this three ways of equivalent ways of looking at the distributive laws. So this is old theory going back in the 70s. Giving the distributive law from TS to ST is the same thing as extending the monad T to Kleisli of S. And this is the same thing as lifting the monad S to the full category of algebras for the monad T. So extensions means that you have this commutative square, but you are using the free functors F from C to Kleisli of S. Lifting, on the other hand, it's again a commuting square, but now you are using the forgetful functors from Eilenberg-Moore to see. And whenever you have one of these three equivalent notions, so T hat and S hat in this picture need to be monads as well that make the squares commute. Whenever you have one of these three equivalent conditions, you can put a monad structure on the composite functor ST. And furthermore, this is so that Eilenberg-Moore of ST is isomorphic. Here you have, so these are the same as Eilenberg-Moore of S hat, and equivalently, you can describe them as gamma algebras. What are gamma algebras? So you have some object X, which carries both a T Eilenberg-Moore algebra structure, this a B, so B is an S algebra structure, and furthermore, they should not be independent, they should be correlated via the distributive law gamma, which makes the pentagon commute. Yes?
So just about the question about the composing of these monads.
Yes?
I think, is it the same setting that if you have a monodal category without necessarily being symmetric, and then you have two monoids and you want to tensor them together and form a new monoid?
Yeah.
So it works in that setting.
Yeah, I think there are formal ways of...
That's the question, when the multiplication of monoids is again a monoid.
Yeah, yeah.
In non-symmetric, okay.
I think there are ways of, maybe if you look in the...
Monad is the monoid in the category.
Exactly. So thank you for, it's just that. So then...
This question just becomes that the non-symmetric monodal category, when is the multiplication of monoids again a monoid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. But I mean, here this is something that it's somehow very well known and very studied about Eilenberg-Moore of S and Eilenberg-Moore of S hat. But in fact, there is a little bit more that is perhaps, it's well known, of course, as well, but not as well known as the part about Eilenberg-Moore algebra. So if you look dually at Kleisli, whenever you have this distributive law from TS to ST, then also it's very easy to check that Kleisli of the composite monad ST is actually the same as Kleisli of T hat. What is T hat? T hat was this extension. So you have the monad T hat on Kleisli of S. So you can consider the free algebras for T hat. And these are exactly the free algebras for ST. So you then have this adjunction between Kleisli of S and Kleisli of ST. Okay? I mean, Kleisli of ST is Kleisli for a monad on Kleisli of S. Okay? You have the free functor corresponding to the monad T hat and the forgetful functor corresponding to the monad T hat. So when you have this, for suitable ways of looking at the languages, this adjunction also lifts to categories of automata. Okay? And this works very nicely. So you can say, okay, now let's take S to be power set, and let's take T to be D. And you get exactly what we were aiming for in this example with probabilistic automata, the adjunction between belief state transformers and the probabilistic automata. Only that we should not forget that here we have a hypothesis. We need the distributive law from TS to ST, which ensures that we have the monad structure on ST. And the problem is that there is no such distributive law, and even more, you can't have a monad structure on PD. And this goes back to Daniela Varaka's PhD thesis. And then this absence of a distributive law is featured in many other papers, including the ones that I was citing on how to combine algebraic theory, complex algebra. So always, unfortunately, these abstract constructions do not lead to a presentation for the monad we are interested in because we don't have a distributive law. Okay, so you see this over and over again. And there are even more negative results that you don't even have a monad structure on power set composed with itself. I'm speaking, of course, about the covariant power set. And when T satisfies some further conditions, including having a union subject to some mild assumptions, you don't have a distributive laws from TP to PT. And then in the PhD thesis of Swart and in their Lix 2019 paper, there are more no-go theorems for distributive laws. So there are many theories where you don't have such nice distributive laws. And there are workarounds. I mean, you can use, instead of distributions, the monad of index valuation. So you sort of want to get rid of some idempotency aspects. You can define by hand a composite monad, which looks a bit like power set composed with distributions, but instead of taking arbitrary sets of distributions, you take only convex subsets of distributions. So this is this monad PC, which was also featured. So this is the workaround that was used in the paper of Filippo Alexandra and Anna Sokolova in Concours 2017. But you can ask, okay, you have this nice monad structure, convex power sets of distributions, where does it come from? Okay, you can check by hand that all the axioms work fine, but why? Okay, and the one question that comes up is, are they canonical in some sense? And we can ask ourselves also, how far away we are from having a distributive law between distributions and power sets. Okay. Do you have natural transformations? And if so, does it satisfy some of the 4 axioms which are required in the definition? And if yes, which ones? And it turns out that you can find very easily the natural transformations based on, well, again, well-known theory of Bar, that you can extend the functor to the category of sets and relations whenever it preserves pullbacks. Okay. So and the distribution functor does preserves pullbacks. So if you can extend the functor to the category of relations, then this automatically gives you a law between the functor D and the power set monad. So you get the law from dP to PD, and you have 2 axioms almost for free, okay, involving the unit of P and the multiplication of P. So 2 to go, distribution, multiplication of D and unit of D. And it turns out that the one which is not working is the one for the unit of the distribution. And this is not very much a surprise if you look at the proof which appeared in Daniela Baraka's thesis, where you have this unit and the naturality of the unit used to craft a counterexample for the existence of the law. But the question is, what about the law, the axiom, involving the multiplication of the monad D? And it turns out that this 3rd axiom works out, is satisfied. And we recover a notion of weak distributive law, which was, it was used in a 2-categorical setting in some previous papers of Baum and Lack. But in the precise way, this concrete 1-categorical setting, and using this precise terminology, it was introduced by Garner, where he had a somewhat similar problem. How do you connect the power set monad on set with the Vietoris monad on compact Hausdorff spaces? Okay, so if you look, I did not. So on set you have the power set monad, and here you have the category of compact Hausdorff spaces with the forgetful factor, and here you have the the Vietoris monad, V from Vietoris, with forgetful functor, and this square does not commute because the Vietoris functor is taking closed subsets. So if you go like this from some space, compact Hausdorff space X tau, here you obtain the closed subsets of X. Whereas if you forget the topological structure and you take power set, you get all the subsets of X. So in fact here, okay, you have an inclusion, okay? But on the other hand, if I give you some subset of a compact Hausdorff space, you can also take its closure, okay? So this is a non-commuting square, but nevertheless, there are some tool cells there which satisfies some extra properties. And somehow, using the concept of weak distributive laws, Gardner exhibited this functor V as a canonical, in some sense, a canonical lifting of the power set. Okay. So compact Hausdorff spaces are the Eilenberg-Moore algebra for the monad beta, the Stonchek compactification monad. Okay, and just as you don't have a distributive law involving power set and distributions, you don't have a distributive law, a strong distributive law involving the monad, the ultrafilter monad beta, and the power set. But what Gardner showed is that you have a weak law. Okay, so it satisfies all of the 4 axioms, but for the unit of beta.
One of them should be swapped, right? In the last
Oh, yes, of course. I did not get my coffee. Yes, otherwise you know. Yeah. So it's from beta P to P beta, where you don't have a weak, a strong law, but you do have a law. And what is very nice is that the very nice theory that was developed for strong laws also works in the weak case under some very mild assumptions. So, weak distributive laws, I sort of explained to you what they are. Natural transformations with 3 axioms. Unit for S, multiplication for T, multiplication for S. What are weak extensions T hat of the monad T on Kleisli of S? So T hat should be a functor, and it should have multiplication, which is associative, I mean. But you don't have the unit. So T hat is a semi-monad, okay? What is a weak lifting of S to Eilenberg-Moore of T? Well, this is slightly more complicated to define. So on the left, the only thing which is missing is the unit of T hat. But here, on the right, you have this square, which is not commuting, but where you have the two cells, which correspond to this inclusion, respectively this closure operator that you have here, and they should satisfy some axioms, okay, involving the compatibility with the multiplications and of the monads. And if you assume that in C idempotent split, then I mean, this equivalence is under some assumptions. So the construction of S hat assumes that idempotent splits in the base category. Similarly, if you have this condition, you obtain a monad structure on a, well, it's not quite a composite. So ST hat is not, as a functor, is not ST, okay? It is obtained by actually looking at this lifting S hat and looking at its Eilenberg-Moore algebras, and the Eilenberg-Moore algebra for ST hat are the same as the Eilenberg-Moore algebras for S hat. Okay. So in fact, the monad. So you have C, you have Eilenberg-Moore algebra for T. Here you have S hat. So what you do the free construction here, the S hat, and then you forget, okay? And this is your monad ST hat, the composite, okay? And what is really nice is that this Eilenberg-Moore algebras can also be described as gamma algebras, and they are defined here exactly in the same way. So they are objects with T algebra structure, S algebra structure related by the natural transformation gamma. So the definition here is actually exactly the same. So now if you instantiate S with power set and T with beta, you get Gardner's example of Viatoris monad. So this S hat will be the Viatoris monad. But if you take T to be the distribution monad, what you get as S hat will be the convex power set. So in our example, so what we show is that you have a weak law like this, and then these are convex algebras. And here, if I start with some convex algebra, in order to get another convex algebra, you take only its convex subsets. And this has also a convex algebra structure. Okay? And then you have this closure operator, which is taking the convex closure of some Z. And this is the monad, which some people found a bit ad hoc. Okay, now we have a way of expressing it as a canonical lifting. And the difficulty in showing that this is the weak law is actually the interaction with the multiplication for the monad D, in proving that this canonical law that you obtain by the fact that D preserves weak pullback satisfies the multiplication law for D. This is the most complicated aspect of the proof. But if the story here for Eilenberg-Moore, which is described here at the bottom, is very nice, consisting in liftings and SD hat, the story for free algebras, we're still a bit of work in progress. Well, maybe Richard knows this already, but for me, I'm still trying to understand all the details somehow. The problem, as you saw here, is that this T hat, which is here, is not a monad. It doesn't have a unit. It's a semi-monad. Okay? So if it doesn't have a unit, then Kleisli of T hat is not a category. Okay? You don't have the identities. You can still compose morphisms using the multiplication of T hat, but you don't have identities. So this is a semi-category. And it turns out that you have semi-functors between Kleisli of T hat, which is a semi-category, and Kleisli of the composite ST hat. So that one is a category because ST hat is a monad. And there is even a notion of semi-adjunction that you can find very easily if you look it up on NLab. But these two very natural semi-functors are not actually forming a semi-adjunction. Okay? And then, of course, you have Kleisli of S and Kleisli of ST hat. Both of them are categories. And you can come up with two very natural, the obvious way of building functors between them. But then again, they do not form an adjunction. Okay? So there is a unit which is not natural. So you cannot really apply off the shelf. I mean, my goal would be to understand determinization of probabilistic automata as a special example of this kind of situation where you are relating these categories of free algebra or these semi-categories of free algebras for semi-monads. But it's not that obvious yet. So this is something that I have already told you about, that we have this weak distributive law involving the power set monad and the finite distribution monad. And in fact, I have also explained to you a bit how the proof works. So I will tell you what we do know, how to apply this theory to the example that I have started with. You should tell me how am I doing with time?
8 minutes or so?
8 minutes, okay, that's good. So can we explain this determinization process using weak distributive laws? And we didn't quite do it yet with the Kleisli and functorial approach. I was actually hoping to have a very neat theory to tell you before this talk, but well, it didn't. It was wishful thinking. Maybe in a couple of weeks it will be ready. What we do know is that if we forget a bit about the input alphabet, okay? So let's say that we only have one letter, okay? Then you can think of your system only as coalgebras for ST or coalgebras for S hat, okay? So coalgebras for ST in our case, where S is power set and T is distribution. So these are coalgebras for power set of distributions. Okay, and this is exactly what we have here on the left. Okay, and you have the free functor from C to Eilenberg-Moore of T. Okay, and it turns out that you can lift it to a functor from coalgebras of ST to coalgebras for the lifted monad S hat. So S hat was this weak lifting of S to Eilenberg-Moore of T. Okay, so if you think what is this in terms of S being distributions and T being power set, so you have set, you have Eilenberg-Moore of V, so these are convex algebras or barycentric algebras. And then you have coalgebras for power set D, with a forgetful functor here. And then you have coalgebras for the weak lifting, which is convex power sets, on the convex power set. So here is the free functor, and here you have a lifting of this functor. So you are transforming the coalgebras. So these are, what are these? They are coalgebras based where the carrier set is a convex algebra obtained by this for applying this forgetful functor, and where the branching behavior is given by S hat. So it is exactly this convex structure that you have here. And similarly, the forgetful functor that you have for Eilenberg-Moore of T to C also lifts to a functor from the coalgebras for S hat to coalgebras for S. So you can forget that it's actually, I mean, this forgetful functor is very easy. You simply forget that you have a convex structure there. But if you combine these two functors together, so if you take the composition of the lifting of UT with the composition of the lifting of FT, you get a functor from coalgebras of ST to coalgebras of S, which is precisely what was described in this Concours 2017 paper of Filippo and his co-authors. So they are this transformation of PAs into belief state transformers. So I was cheating a little bit because I did not explain to you anything about the labels, okay? I mean, if you want to put in the input alphabet in the picture, you are not talking, I mean, it works, but it gets a bit more complicated, okay? Because you have to figure out how this weak laws also interacts with other distributions between functors and monads. So you get something functor, monad, weak law, some functor, monad law, and you have to combine them using some, well, the usual interactions that you have when you have several layers. And then actually there is a paper in MFPS last year of Alexandra Guama, a former student, who explains very nicely how weak laws can be combined with strong laws, and he generalizes Eugenia Cheng's iterative theory of distributive laws in this weak setting. Right, so we can also have, as an application of this, a way of presenting convex semilattices. So in the paper about the theory of traces for systems with non-determinism probability, there was this concept of convex semilattices which popped up. There are again some minor footnotes, so there is a little grain of salt that has to be considered. But this notion of convex semilattices is actually extremely natural. So you have a set X with a subsemilattice structure with a barycentric algebra structure, which are related by what you expect to be a distributivity axiom. And in fact, these are precisely given by this pentagon diagram, which describes the algebras for the composite monad, now which is obtained in a canonical way. Where else can we go with this? We can also try, as a blueprint for moving them to domains and to more complicated settings, we can try to go to a continuous setting. So what we showed in a paper with Alexandre Gouin and Marc Aiguier is that we have a weak distributive law of the Viatoris monad over itself on the category of compact Hausdorff spaces. And there again, we used a lot of the theory that, the fact that compact Hausdorff space is a regular category, the fact that we have there a way of explaining, we have a concept of relations. Kleisli of Viatoris is very closely related to the category of relations on compact Hausdorff spaces. We know when we can extend functors to relations. So it's in some sense a nice generalization, but it's also using the very special properties of Viatoris and the fact that it is very much power set-like. Okay, so we would like now to find some examples of weak laws where we don't have necessarily a power set-like functor involved. If I want to take questions, I'm not sure I have times to describe this in great detail, but just to tell you very, very briefly that when you have a monad, so T is now a monad, is not a semi-monad, you can consider also the notion of semi-algebra for this monad. So you have arrows from A from Tx to X, and they only interact nicely with the multiplication. So they are associative, but the unit axiom is not satisfied. And it turns out that when you have a weak distributive laws, because you have the three axioms that work fine, then this means that you can lift the monad S, nevertheless, to the category of semi-algebras for the monad T. And you obtain a commutative square. You redo the proof by back, and it works just fine. Semi-algebras, morally, they should be algebras, because if you think about them in terms of, from a universal algebraic perspective, you are dropping some unit axioms, okay? But you still have an algebraic descriptions of what they should be. So one question that we asked ourselves was how can you relate the monad T? Can you obtain another monad such that the semi-algebras for T are the algebras for this new monad? And it turns out that the construction was very easy to understand for the maybe monad. We started with this example. To make, I come back if there will be questions about this, but the result that we got here was that you can put a monad structure on identity plus T. So the only assumption is that the category has to have coproducts. Then you can take this coproduct. Okay, you put a monad structure on this functor, and it turns out that the algebras for identity plus T are the semi-algebras for T. Okay, so one question again, that comes to mind is whether for these systems where you don't have distributive laws, can you actually work with some strong laws by slightly modifying the monads? And this is possible because weak distributive laws from TS to ST are in one-to-one correspondence with actual strong distributive laws from the from the semi-free monad TS that we constructed there with this identity plus T monad to S over S. Okay. Again, with an additional very ugly axiom that I decided not to put on the slide, but you can find it in our MFPS 2021 paper. So another way of cheating somehow is you work with, you try to model your system using some different monad. Rather than distribution monad, you ask yourself what is identity plus t. So there are plenty of open questions that are left to work in this area. These are some references. Again, I realized that I should put now the references also for the Automata papers with Thomas. I try to update my slides and put them on the website of SYCO with all the typos fixed. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Other questions or comments?
So you're looking for different perspectives on monads and weakening them. I'm wondering if you have ever come across the paper by, it's called Monads Need Not Be End-Functors.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if...
I did not read that paper, I'm sorry.
It's some computer science paper. So I'm just wondering that if there's a kind of a... okay, if you haven't read it, then my question is kind of mute. So.
Right, but we can...
it's an interesting point of view that it kind of generalizes the notion of monad to be a little bit more difficult to work with, but it kind of generalizes the context where it can be.
Is this the idea of relative monad?
Maybe, I'm not
sure.
I think it's a. These are the kind of absolute conflicts related.
Okay, I think I might have
Okay.
briefly seen this at some point, but we did not dig into this direction. But yeah, I mean, here we were looking at other conditions that how we can weaken the setting. Yeah.
To find motivation to kind of dig deeper into this kind of monad. So if you had stumbled across it, that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, we can discuss this later, maybe.
Other questions? No?
Yeah.
Tito?
So you have kind of a symmetry breaking between the Heidelberg model and the Kleisli, right? And me naively, I would have said just put the up at the right place and everything will translate. Could we explain maybe where is the symmetry breaking exactly? Why it's?
I mean, the notion of distributive law is very symmetric, right? Because you have the two units, the two multiplications, and in the notion of weak law, you are dropping the axiom about the unit of one of the monads. Okay, so this is already a symmetrical a way of breaking the symmetry already at the level of the definition of what is the weak law. And then it's somehow hidden in you start with only these three axioms, and you look at what goes through in the proof of Beck and what doesn't go through. And it turns out that on the side of Kleisli, you have this thing which is not quite a monad, but your square commutes. On the side of Eilenberg-Moore, you don't have the square that commutes, and you don't even have you can lift the monad, but to a category of semi-algebras. Okay, so if you think about this, you can recover a kind of perspective. So you have a semi-monad on Kleisli, and a semi-monad on Kleisli, and the monad on semi-algebras. In that sense, but then it's still a bit. I'm not satisfied with this answer myself, because I'm very sure that there is more to dig into understanding this at the higher categorical level. But we should look closer in the original papers of Lack and Baum for that as well, where it's a generalized notion of this weak distributive laws.